Craving your next action-packed adventure? Audible delivers thrills of every kind on your command, like Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, where a lone astronaut must save humanity from extinction, narrated with stunning intensity by Ray Porter. From electrifying suspense and daring quest to spine-tingling horror and romance in far-off realms, unleash your adventurous side with gripping titles that'll keep you guessing. Discover exclusive Audible originals, hotly anticipated new releases, and must-listen bestsellers that hook you from the first minute. Because Audible knows there's no greater thrill than the one that speaks to you. Discover what lies beyond the edge of your seat. Start your free 30-day trial at audible.com/WonderyUS. That's audible.com/WonderyUS.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 225 of the True Crime All the Time Unsolved podcast. I'm Mike Ferguson, and with me, as always, is my partner in true crime, Mike Gibson. Gibby, how are you?
Hey, man, how you doing?
I'm doing great, as always.
Yeah?
You're always doing great. We try to keep it upbeat. What else can you do, man?
That's it, man, right there.
Can't let everything weigh you down,
No.
or you'll sink.
Yeah.
That should be a saying.
Put it on a shirt?
Put it on a t-shirt.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and give our shout outs. For Patreon, we had Amy Airley.
Hey, Amy.
KJ Sounds.
What's going on, KJ?
Sounds like a cool DJ name.
Yeah. KJ up on the, what do they call those? Turntables? Wiki. What?
Did you just say wiki? Jared Sopko.
What's going on, Jarrett?
Matt Finch.
Hey, Matt.
Joanne Collins.
What's up, Collins?
Eric Luna.
Hey, Eric.
Jackie Holland.
Hey, Jackie.
Tiffany Morgan.
What's going on, Tiffany?
Keith Norrod.
Hey, Norrod.
Emily.
Hey, good old Emily.
James Adams.
Well, appreciate that, James.
Smiley Luke.
Well, hello, Smiley.
Elizabeth Leisner.
Hey, Elizabeth.
Brianna Pakovitz.
Ooh, Pakovitz.
Summer.
Good old Summer.
Cassie Langley.
What's happening, Cassie?
Angela Rajkovic.
Rajakovic. Yeah.
And last but not least, Chase Fasky.
Hey, Chase.
And if we go back into the vault, Gibbs, this week we selected Allie G.
All right, good old Allie G.
Yeah, we appreciate all the new Patreon support, the continued support. We had some great PayPal donations from Christy Hines.
Hey, there's Christy again.
Belinda Rivamonte.
Ooh, Rivamonte.
Judy Larson.
What's going on, Judy?
And Jennifer Warmuth.
Hey, appreciate that, Jennifer.
Gibbs, right now on True Crime All the Time, we have an episode out. We're talking about the murder of Cassie Jo Stoddard. This one's brutal.
It is.
Not only the murder itself, Cassie Jo Stoddard was a 16-year-old, but was murdered by two 16-year-old friends who were inspired by the Scream movies, the Columbine shootings. I mean, it's one of those cases where if you didn't know it was real, there are parts of it that you'd be hard-pressed to believe. I'll just leave it at that.
I think that's a good place to leave it.
All right, buddy. Are you ready to get into this episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved?
I am.
We are talking about the unsolved murders of the Chicago Strangler. There are anywhere between 50 and 75 victims being attributed to one or perhaps more active serial killers in the Chicago area. And there's tons of theories, Gibbs, surrounding this, but there's also a bunch of questions. I think one of the main ones is, how has such a prolific killer, or killers if there's multiple people, remained at large, stalking victims for such a long period of time, given the fact that, we have these modern forensic methods of detection?
It's true.
Many experts predicted that we would never see the victim numbers that killers were able to reach in the 70s and 80s. We've talked about that, right? We've always thought that it would be harder to do that today. And I think for the most part, that's true, because these killers would be caught much earlier on. because of advancements in forensics, DNA, all of that stuff. So how has the Chicago Strangler, as this person or multiple people are known in the press and on the internet, managed to elude capture? And who's killing the women of Chicago? It was the Chicago press who dubbed him the Chicago Strangler because it's thought that this person is responsible for at least 51 victims. And again, I'm going to say there's still a very good possibility that there's more than one person. Obviously, we don't know that. Most of the victims are women of color. And I think because of that, Gibbs, I hate to say it, but it seems as though their deaths have not received much attention either from law enforcement or the press. Police in Chicago have not really said much about the cases, and they all remain unsolved. There just doesn't seem to be that sense of urgency to crack the case, capture the killer or killers who are taking the lives of dozens of young women. Now, that may not be the case. That may be the case. Maybe it seems like that because police are unwilling to or reticent to talk about the case. But I think when the public gets that perception, it's not good.
No.
Because the logical conclusion that is often made is that the police just aren't putting in the same effort that they would if this was 51 Caucasian women from affluent areas, let's say.
Right.
I think that's the argument that's made. Some people may argue with that, but you and I have done a number of cases where that has been borne out. I mean, it's been, I don't want to say proven, but it's hard to dispute the fact that when you compare two cases side by side in the same area with very similar circumstances, one victim is Caucasian, the other victim is black, let's say, and they have not received the same attention.
Yeah.
We've seen it time and time again.
I know we've covered a case up in Chicago, about a year ago, which we had this same type of conversation.
And I think, Gibbs, the one thing we have to talk about is the notoriety that this case has garnered. It's not much, right? There are probably quite a few people listening that have never even heard of this case, despite, the intense interest in true crime cases in general, and specifically in serial killers. You look at a case like Zodiac or, some of these infamous cases where the body count is nowhere near what we're talking about here, but yet much more well-known killers or cases.
Yeah. Not even just locally, but nationally.
Yeah. And I think that has led many people to suspect that, there's some apathy on the part of those tasked with investigating, that there's just not been that much attention given to the victims due to their ethnicities, due to their profession, and we'll get into all of that. The website unforgotten51.com features photos and biographies of some of the victims thought to have been killed by the Chicago Strangler. The website was a project undertaken by the journalism students at Roosevelt University in Chicago to raise awareness about the cases. The murders are thought to have started in early 2001. This predator's preferred victim type appears to be middle-aged black women, but he also sometimes killed white women in the same age bracket. His youngest victim was 18 years old, and his oldest was 58. With a few exceptions, most victims were found in alleyways, abandoned buildings, or trash cans in remote areas. The majority were strangled to death. One victim was dismembered. 3 were killed by blunt force trauma to the head. 3 were asphyxiated, and 2 were found with the plastic bags used to kill them still wrapped around their heads. 2 victims were burned in a trash can. 32 victims were African American, 15 were Caucasian, 1 was Hispanic, and the ethnicities of 3 victims were undetermined. And Gibbs, we have to say up front, when we're talking about this high of a number of victims, 51 victims, there's no way that we can talk about each of these victims in the way that we would like to, right? Give as much background as we would like to. We just can't do it.
Right.
I mean, it would span 3 or 4 episodes probably to really break down and give as much information about each victim as we would normally do. I think the best way to walk through this case is to talk about the victims in the order that their bodies were found. In 2001, 32-year-old Angela Ford, 42-year-old Charlotte Day, 33-year-old Winifred Shines, 53-year-old Brenda Cohert, 41-year-old Elaine Bonetta, and 39-year-old Claudia Banks were found strangled to death. Most of these women were found in an alley or vacant lots. One was found in her apartment. So Gibbs, right off the bat, in 2001 alone, it's believed that the Chicago Strangler claimed 6 victims. In 2002, 48-year-old Bessie Scott, 44-year-old Gwendolyn Williams, 40-year-old Jody Grisham, 36-year-old Lorraine Harris, 33-year-old Deli Jones, and 37-year-old Celeste Jackson were found strangled to death. 4 of the victims were found in an alley. Another was found in an abandoned beauty salon, and 1 victim was found in an abandoned parking garage. So 6 more victims in 2002, 2 years, 12 victims. In 2003, the killer continued to increase his murder count and even killed 2 victims on the same day. It's even thought that he changed up the method in which he killed some of his victims and how he disposed of the bodies. 55-year-old Nancy Walker, 42-year-old Linda Green, 30-year-old Tarika Jones, 20-year-old Rosenda Barocchio, 29-year-old Latanya Keller, 21-year-old Latricia Hall, Lucy Sett, and Ethel Anderson. All were found strangled to death, with the exception of 2. 2 had suffered blunt force trauma to the head, which at this time, Gibbs, was new for this killer. And again, we're saying all of this as we're assuming these murders were committed by the same individual. Again, we don't know that for sure.
Yeah, you could argue it the other way.
Yes, you could argue that this is a different MO. Maybe it's a different killer. The killer also dismembered one of his victims. The victims were found in alleys, abandoned buildings, a basement of an abandoned house, and 1 victim was stuffed into a garbage can. So by the end of 2003, it's thought that the Chicago Strangler had killed 20 women. And this 3-year stretch would see the highest victim count. His activity slows as the years go on, but he's still very active.
If these 20 victims are associated to him, those are some big numbers.
Oh, we're talking about an extremely prolific serial killer if all of these victims were killed by the same person. If they were not, then we're talking about multiple serial killers running around Chicago.
Yeah.
Which is also scary.
And you would think you would see a lot of press wrapped around that.
But there wasn't. And like we talked about, that has led people over the years to think, okay, the press doesn't care. The police don't care. Nobody cares about these victims. In 2004 and 2005, 40-year-old Michelle Davenport, 42-year-old Tamala Edwards, 18-year-old Michaelava Williams, 23-year-old Precious Smith, 25-year-old Denise Torres, 33-year-old Wanda Hall, 35-year-old Yvette Mason, and 35-year-old Shaniqua Williams were all found strangled to death in alleys, vacant lots, and buildings. 1 victim was stuffed in a garbage can. So in these 5 years, it's believed that the Chicago Strangler murdered 28 women and disrupted hundreds, if not thousands of lives because of these murders. And again, Gibbs, you have a lot of people who have come out in, online blogs, forums, things like that, talking about this case and, making the statement that the Chicago PD just didn't look hard enough into these murders. And Gibbs, we're not even sure if police at this point had linked any of the murders together. I mean, first of all, they just didn't really talk about it, right? There wasn't a lot of information that came out from the Chicago PD regarding these murders. So maybe behind the scenes they had linked some, but we don't know.
Yeah, because if they did link it together, you would hope that they would want to alert the media and alert the communities where these murders were taking place in hopes to avoid any further murders.
From 2006 to 2008, 22-year-old Margaret Gomez, 21-year-old Antoinette Simmons, 34-year-old Kelly Sarf, 26-year-old Veronica Frazier, 56-year-old Mary Setlowski, 21-year-old Teresa Bunn, 52-year-old Marianne Lewis, and 32-year-old Genevieve Mellis were all found dead. Most were strangled to death. 2 were strangled and placed in trash cans and set on fire. One victim was asphyxiated with a plastic bag over her head. Most of the victims were found in alleys, with 2 found in abandoned buildings.
So now we have 36 victims, no answers. Is it because the police just don't have any evidence, any clues to who's doing this? Is it because it's a lack of investigation? Or is this killer just that good?
Well, and again, we still don't even know if the police had linked any of these cases together. You would think at the very least there would be a tenuous connection made because of the way that most of these victims were killed, where their bodies were left, things like that. Very similar MO in many of these killings. Now, to be fair, Chicago has a fairly high homicide rate.
They do.
So, the Chicago Police Department is pretty busy chasing down leads on hundreds of cases every year, maybe thousands. I have no idea what the number is. So there's no doubt, Gibbs, that, they're bogged down with fairly large caseloads. The killings continued from 2009 through 2012. Charlene Miller, 29-year-old Victoria Bank, 36-year-old Shannon Williams, 32-year-old Vanessa Rajokovich, 46-year-old LaFonda Wilson, 37-year-old Kawanda Critter, 46-year-old Angela Prophet, and 30-year-old Pamela Wilson were all killed. Most of these victims were strangled. One was killed by blunt force trauma to the head, and another victim was asphyxiated when a bag was placed over her head. The victims were all found in alleys or vacant lots. So, Gibbs, I'll say this. Whether all of these murders that we've talked about, the murders that we're getting ready to talk about, are connected. By 2012, there were 44 murders in 11 years, and you'd have to say that the majority of them had a very similar MO. There are some that you can find some differences in, but I think the majority align with each other.
I think you can break them up into 3 groups, but I think the vast majority of them belong in the first group. The strangulation, the alleys, the vacant buildings. I think that's the recurring theme in these 44 murders up to this point.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, you could look at some of the murders where the victim was stuffed in a garbage can, set on fire. Okay, that's a little different. Blunt force trauma to the head. Maybe you can categorize those a little differently. Again, we don't know, but I think we have to talk about the murders that are thought to be, by many, committed by the Chicago Strangler. But then it's very strange, Gibbs, because it's thought that the killer went quiet over the next 13-month period and didn't strike again until February 2014, when he strangled 50-year-old Velma Howard and left her body in an alley. Then another 3 years passed before 21-year-old Diamond Turner was found in a trash can. She had been asphyxiated and sustained blunt force trauma to her face and head. Her remains were found on March 3rd, 2017. The killer struck again in June of 2017, strangling 58-year-old Catherine Buchanan to death on a parkway. So now we could potentially be up to 47 murders committed by the Chicago Strangler. Now, not all 47 murders may be the responsibility of one person, but Gibbs, it's also possible that, this person could have murdered more people.
Could have.
During this time period. I do want to go back to the break. If we are talking about a single serial killer, why a 13-month break? And then a 3-year break. And to me, there's only a couple of reasons there for that. Incarceration.
Sure.
Maybe this person moved for a period of time and was committing murder somewhere else. I don't think that's as likely. To me, this seems like a person, a killer who is familiar with the Chicago area and would feel much more comfortable carrying out these types of murders in and around that city, as opposed to going somewhere else and maybe not knowing the layout and, the ins and outs of the streets and the alleys and all of that. So I tend to lean more towards the fact that, maybe this person was put away.
And I would agree with that.
Obviously not for murder, but
right.
For, maybe a petty crime, a lesser felony. You get 13 months, you get a 3-year stretch the second time.
Just enough time to get him off the street for a little bit.
Then, you're back out and killing again.
Yeah. But, you do notice that from 2001 up until now, the victim count starts dwindling down.
Which I think is something we need to talk about, in a lot of the cases that we do, especially on True Crime All the Time. When you're talking about a serial killer, the murders ramp up or increase in frequency over time. I think we see that more often than not.
Right.
It becomes almost like what they're getting from committing these murders is not enough, or doesn't sustain the perpetrator for the same period of time that it did when they began or early on.
Yeah, normally they want more. Got to have more.
We've equated it before to, drugs.
Sure.
And sometimes people get to the point where they have to do more and more drugs because they're not getting the same high that they got when they first started.
So, depending on the age of the killer when he started this, as he got older, maybe he had more restrictions because of his age.
Yeah, I mean, you can make the case that maybe this person had less freedom. And I don't mean in the sense that they were incarcerated, not incarcerated. I'm talking more about life events, right? If you're single and let's say in your early 20s, if you're a serial killer, you probably have little to no restrictions on going out, targeting victims, casing, stalking, all of that. As you get older and your life changes, maybe you get married, maybe you have children. Okay, that can change the type of freedom that you have to do these sorts of things. So, I mean, I'm not saying that's the case, but it's definitely a possibility.
Yeah.
Mochi Health is here to help you start your weight loss journey with caring, personalized support. Meet one-on-one with board-certified obesity doctors and registered dietitians who truly listen and understand your unique needs. Eligible patients can access affordable GLP-1 medications delivered right to their door each month. No insurance? No problem. Mochi Health accepts FSA and HSA, making care accessible and affordable. And with 24/7 customer service, you'll never feel alone on your path to better health. Get started with Mochi Health today. Take the free quiz at joinmochi.com and use code AUDIO40 at checkout for $40 off your first month of membership. That's joinmochi.com with promo code AUDIO40.
In 2018, the final 4 of the 51 victims were discovered. 49-year-old Valeria Jackson, 44-year-old Laura Harvin, 47-year-old Nicole Ridge, and 34-year-old Rial Hollyfield were found dead. All 4 victims were believed to be strangled. However, some of the bodies were too decomposed to determine the actual cause of death. 3 victims were found in abandoned houses, while the 4th was found stuffed in a garbage can in an alley. So again, Gibbs, 51 victims who may or may not have met their deaths at the hands of this so-called Chicago Strangler, but it's really hard not to see the similarities.
Sure.
And again, we don't know if police really were putting some of this stuff together, or if they did, when they did, because that information just really has not been disclosed.
And we know, sure, Chicago is a big city.
Sure. Yeah.
Bunch of alleys.
Bunch of murders every year.
But this is 51 unsolved murders.
Well, and they're all women.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at the age ranges, which is kind of hard because we broke it down by the year that, each victim was discovered. Yeah, there is some span there, but there's also, at least to my way of thinking, somewhat of a pattern. Most of these victims are late 20s to mid 40s. Now there's outliers,
right?
Obviously at both ends of the spectrum, but I think by and large, the majority are within an age range. The other thing that really kind of stuck out to me as we were going year by year, it seemed as though almost every year it was most victims found in alleyways or abandoned houses, and one victim found stuffed in a trash can.
Right.
That really stuck out at me. It was almost like the killer decided, once a year I'm going to change it up in the way that I dispose of my victims. Or you have another killer whose MO is to dispose of victims in trash cans.
Yeah.
That's what's so perplexing about this case. You can really run down a bunch of different avenues.
Yeah. Like you said, you could have with the one MO X amount of victims, and then you could have some just individual
random.
killings.
Yeah. It could be just random murders where victims just ended up in trash cans. It wasn't an MO. It was a one-time kind of one-off type murder or a hit, or who knows.
But it has enough similarities that you say, let's box it in with this.
Yeah. We're talking about it at least.
Right.
The website murderdata.org, ran by the Murder Accountability Project, reports on crime statistics for all U.S. states. Crime statistics from the state of Illinois from 1965 to 2019 report that there were 49,000 homicides during that period. Only 17,650 have been solved, which is roughly, about 36%. When you break those numbers down further, from 1965 to 1981, law enforcement cleared over 80% of homicides in the state. Then from 82 to 93, it dropped to about 50%. And from 1994 to 2019, the rate dropped below 5%. So, I think that 36% is misleading.
It is.
Because it's really high early on, goes down to the point where, during the last 25 years, it's below 5%.
And I think you got to look at the fact that the bulk of the homicides would be on the back end and not the front end either. So that's going to make a difference as well.
Yeah, I think you have to take that into account. Definitely. The website explains that in the 1960s, 70s, and early 80s, investigators had no centralized fingerprint databases, ballistics databases, sex offender registries, or even real-time criminal record checks, as there are now. In the 1990s through today, you have all the databases, including DNA databases. So the question that gets asked is, why are less cases being solved in the state of Illinois? There are some people who believe it's a phenomenon known in forensics as linkage blindness. Basically, it's seeing an individual murder case and failing to link it to similar cases, and therefore not sharing useful information with other agencies to assist in linking and solving crimes.
Sure, I can see that. I get that. I also think that because of the volume of cases, again, I mean, your resources are going to be stretched.
Well, but you're not assuming that the resources in 2000, 2010, 2020 are the same as what they were in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, are you? Because my assumption is the homicide rate went up, the resources had to go up. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Well, maybe that's a bad assumption.
You would think, or you would hope, but like in all these major cities, there's budget restrictions, and you just can't keep adding more detectives and police to your roster because
that's true,
right? You got to make sure that you can actually afford these people in your budgets.
So I get all that. I get what you're saying. Again, we don't have the numbers on, okay, how many police officers did they have in the 1960s versus today? But I also get the argument that, the tools in the toolbox today are so vastly superior to what they had back then.
Oh, yeah.
Why are there so many unsolved cases? So I understand why that question gets asked. I don't know the answer.
Do you think the criminals today are smarter, or do you think as technology advanced that the criminals are aware of those advancements and are counteracting those advancements, thinking ahead?
There is another theory for the decline in solved cases in Illinois. The theory claims that there are many more stranger-on-stranger murders, including targeted stranger attacks where a killer seeks out a preferred victim type. And there's no doubt, Gibbs, these are the most difficult types of murders to solve because, number one, there's no tie, right, in a stranger-on-stranger murder.
Right.
You can't go back and look at those closest to the victim because the crime wasn't committed by, that type of person. It's a stranger to the victim. So how do you make a connection? And that means that the list of possible suspects is very large.
Yeah, I know in the past you've talked about this theory with some pretty big name serial killers. They were able to elude police because of this, because they randomly picked their victim out, like Tommy Lynn Sells and Israel Keys.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're talking about a serial killer who selects at random, that's a person that's much more difficult to catch. Now, the question you have to ask is that a true statement? Are there more stranger-on-stranger murders today than proportionally than there were in the 60s and 70s? I don't have that answer, but that is one theory. But it's still tough for me to understand how, with all the tools that we have today, we could be talking about a solve rate that has gone all the way down to 5%. That's tough to comprehend. There's a ton of factors that go into it. So I don't want to, make too much of it, but for me, it's hard to understand. When we talk about the killer's profile, that's something that gets a lot of attention in movies, TV shows, novels, things like that. We know that profiling is not an exact science. It's far from it. Famous crime author Michael Arntfield did some research into this topic, and he found that in the cases he studied where profiling was used, the profile generated by the FBI was accurate only about 4% of the time in describing the major characteristics of the killer responsible. Much more accurate are research-based and mathematically sound computer-based programs that use geographical profiling. But despite the high accuracy of these geoprofiling methods, very few law enforcement agencies use them. The Chicago authorities turned to the FBI profilers for assistance with these murders. The FBI profile indicated that the killer known as the Chicago Strangler is likely what they term a missionary killer, as the majority of the victims were sex workers. They believe he could have strong religious beliefs that led him to use their lifestyle as his motivation to kill them. He also most likely has a troubled relationship with his mother and the other central women in his life. The killer is probably not married or has a failed marriage in his past, also adding to his rage against women. He likely has a vendetta. He is trying to act out on proxy victims as stand-ins for the real source of his rage. The killer may also have some type of sexual dysfunction, such as erectile dysfunction or an inability to accept his sexual orientation. This could lead to a lot of rage and to the killer blaming the victims for his inability to perform sexually. He probably believes the world needs to be rid of these evil women and that he is doing the world a favor by taking them out of existence.
Yeah, up until this point, this profile sounds believable.
What sounds believable, it also sounds like a lot of other profiles that we've talked about.
Sure.
And that's kind of my thing with profiles. Most of them are very similar. They cover a large portion of the population.
Kind of broad.
They're broad, right? Normally, when you talk about, a male between the ages of 25 and 45. Okay. How many of those are in Chicago?
Yeah.
A lot.
Sure.
Some of the information in this profile is much more specific, right? When you're talking about somebody that has very strong religious beliefs and is using that as motivation to kill sex workers. Okay, that might narrow it down some. Somebody that has a troubled relationship with his mother, again, I think you're talking about a very large population.
Sure.
How troubled, to what extent the trouble is, that's a different story.
Yeah, that could dictate a whole other.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you hate your mother? Do you not get along with your mother? There's a spectrum there.
Right.
Now, I think what is more likely and what you and I have seen in a lot of cases is that the killer probably targets sex workers because they are easier to get into a vehicle, right? They're easier to get alone, to take to an isolated location where the murder can occur. I mean, how many people are willingly going to go to an abandoned building?
Right.
Not many.
But if that's what you do for your profession,
Yes.
that's what you do, right? It's just part of your everyday business. You're not going to give it a whole lot of thought. I shouldn't go into that vacant building. I shouldn't go over to that vacant lot. Well, I shouldn't go behind this building in this alley. No, that's what you do because that's what you have to do. Where the everyday person would say, this seems a little weird. I'm not going to go behind that building with you.
The FBI went on to say that choosing abandoned buildings allows the killer to reenact his mental fantasies without fear of discovery.
So that works for him because he has no witnesses around, or unlikely to have any witnesses around if you're abandoned.
Much less likely that someone's going to just wander into an abandoned building while you're committing a murder. He then appears to begin killing outdoors in alleys and behind businesses, which the FBI said may have increased the thrill because it brings the possibility of discovery with it. And this is an interesting point because to me, it goes along with what we see sometimes with the increase in frequency, right? So maybe what he was doing, again, was not giving him the same thrill or whatever word you want to use, not giving him what he needed.
Right.
So now he had to add the thrill of a possible discovery.
Yeah.
A little more risky type of behavior. When the killer began his series in 2001, he was likely in his early to mid 20s, and he continued over the next 18 years into 2018. The FBI said that strangling takes a lot of upper body strength. It isn't a killing method for the weak. It's probable that the killer is now in his early to mid 40s. If he continues, and there's no reason why he wouldn't, unless he were to be jailed for another crime or dies, he may switch his killing methods as his physical strength fades to employing another type of weapon. Okay, I understand what they're saying. That would make sense to me if you said, okay, this guy is now in his 60s.
Right.
I don't know that you lose that much strength between 20 and 40, though, that this person would now be incapable of strangling someone. But I get what they're saying.
Yeah. Some strength is going to diminish over time.
It does.
But not that rapidly.
The FBI continued by saying killing by strangulation is a very up close and personal method of murder. This likely means the killer was a sadist who committed the murders out of sexual motivation, getting off on the fear and control he has over the victims. It probably made him feel very powerful. I agree with that 100%. Not that it's right to do that, but that killers who strangle up close most likely get those two things out of it. There's a sexual component, but there's also a power component. You know, I'm powerful. I'm controlling what happens to you. I'm the ultimate decider of whether you live or die.
Yeah, I remember when we covered Tommy Lynn Sells, how you described how he would strangle his victims and how it really made him feel really, really good when he did that, that it was like a drug.
Yeah, I remember he talked about watching the life go out of his victim's eyes.
Yeah.
And that gave him a thrill.
And he had to keep chasing that thrill.
Yeah, over and over, like a drug, right? We keep going back to that. When authorities plotted the murders on a map, they saw a large group in South Chicago, a large group in the West, then kind of a smattering in the north and central parts of the city. Some investigators think it's possible that the killer lives in the southwest area, in between the two largest clusters, giving him the best chance of getting back to his home base safely after each murder.
Well, that would be the easiest scenario to come up with, right?
Yeah. Again, there's nothing here that is blowing me out of the water. I mean, I think a lot of this stuff, including the FBI profile, is very common sense type thinking. Now, some armchair detectives and bloggers have wondered if the killer was a member of law enforcement, which, if he was, would give him a greater knowledge of crime scenes and forensics, possibly allowing him to avoid detection. Now, we don't know what type of evidence the police have been able to collect at the murder scenes. They've not spoken publicly about evidence or the cases very much at all. And we're really not sure why that is, Gibbs. Are they trying to avoid the backlash and criticism that would come with, not being able to solve this large number of murders? Do they not want to alarm the public? Do they not want to negatively affect tourism in the city? It could be one or all.
A number of reasons.
Or a lot of other reasons that I'm not thinking of.
But also find it interesting that, in these type of cases, the police, that a potential suspect is sometimes mentioned as a police officer or somebody in law enforcement.
Yeah, you hear that a lot from the online community.
Right.
And I think it comes from, okay, they haven't been caught. Why have they not been caught? Is it because they're smart enough in the area of forensics and evidence? And is that reason that they know so much about it because they're in law enforcement?
Right.
So I think it's kind of natural for, some people to throw that out there because the person has not been caught. Now, we've talked about the fact that they've been pretty tight-lipped with information, right? The police have. I think the problem with that, Gibbs, is it leaves the public to come up with their own theories. And, people are more than willing to do that, especially online. there have been a number of interesting theories that have popped up on Reddit recently. One user claims that the Chicago PD believes that 2 or more serial killers are responsible for the murders. He wrote, in a city of 9 million people over a 20-year span, it's not out of the realm of possibility to have 2 killers working in the city. But he went on to say to have 2 killers targeting the same type of victims in the same areas may imply that they are working together. Another Reddit user said, in looking at the map, it appears that there are 2 serial killers, one at work on the south side and one at work on the west side. And I think both of those are valid theories.
Sure. I think anybody could say that, right? I mean,
yeah, it just happened to be 2 people on Reddit.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think those are both valid theories. There's probably 10, 20, 30 other ones.
Yeah.
That would all potentially make sense.
I mean, I definitely get it, right? I mean, you got this cluster over here, you got that cluster over there. 2 individuals. Maybe it is one person living in between, traveling back and forth randomly to get their fix.
Maybe it's not random.
Or maybe it's not random.
Maybe their job takes them to certain parts of the city. I mean, see, there again, you can go down just all of these different avenues. But I think, Gibbs, if we're talking about one killer in the Chicago area who murdered all of these victims that we've talked about, killing 6 or 7 victims a year would not be that difficult. That's definitely not out of the realm of possibility at all.
Yeah, he could access the areas with his car. He could have jumped on the elevated train. So getting to and from was not going to be a problem.
I think it is somewhat hard to believe, though, Gibbs, that one killer over the span of 20 years with the high number of victims that we're talking about could leave behind no forensic evidence, witnesses, or survivors that would lead to his identity. Is it possible? Yeah, there's a lot of things that are possible. I don't know if it's likely, but it's definitely possible.
Yeah. There's been other serial killers that have had high numbers in the past.
Sure. But just as possible, or maybe even more possible, is the idea that there are multiple killers, 2 or more. You know, maybe one in the south, maybe one in the west. The area in which they kill could even overlap.
And maybe a 3rd killer up in the north.
Yeah, very possible. In April 2019, the FBI and Chicago police created a task force to investigate the cases to see if there were any links between them. At the time, Chicago police spokesman Howard Ludwig said the evidence doesn't point to a serial killer. However, the Murder Accountability Project, which uses data and an algorithm to investigate possible links, issued a report saying the collection of killings had characteristics suggestive of serial murder. So a couple of things here, Gibbs. We're not going to create a task force until 2019.
Right.
I mean, that jumps out at me right away.
It's a long time.
It is. It's after the last murder that's thought to be connected to the serial killer was committed, and well after the majority were committed. It was recently reported on the website Murder Data that more Black females have been strangled in Chicago, which they believe are linked to this series of crimes. They have suggested that 2 victims strangled in 2019 and 2 in 2020 may be connected to the Chicago Strangler.
So it means that the Chicago Strangler could still be at work.
Could be. Now, a lot of people have asked why there was never any type of public service announcements or notifications, especially to sex workers who were the most likely individuals to be targeted by this killer. And I think, I don't know the exact answer. My theory is that, number one, they've never linked all these crimes together. I mean, in 2019, they came out and said they didn't think it was the work of a serial killer. So based on all of that, why would they ever put out any type of public service announcement or notification if they believe that the evidence doesn't point to one or multiple serial killers? Now, I find it very hard to believe that all 51 of the victims that we talked about were killed by different people. There's no way you would ever get me to believe that.
Yeah, so why not at least come out and give some type of warning, right? I mean, you don't have to say, hey, we have this serial killer out there or this.
You could just say that, a number of sex workers have been targeted over the years. Be careful. I don't know what you could say, but
if you're between this street and that street, however the grid is made up, be on the lookout. Be aware. Have some awareness.
In 2020, Arthur Hilliard was charged with one of the 51 victims' murders. It was 21-year-old Diamond Turner, who was murdered in 2017. Arthur was Diamond's boyfriend at the time. She was suffocated and her head was crushed by blows from a sledgehammer. Okay, that's brutal.
Extremely brutal.
The sledgehammer was found in the basement where Hilliard was residing.
That's the same house where Diamond's body was found in the rear alley in the trash can.
Police had him as a suspect back in 2017, but they didn't pursue it further because they needed better evidence. They collected DNA back then. They sent it off to the state, but I guess, Gibbs, the state was backlogged and they didn't return results until 2020.
Yeah, that's pretty frustrating. I read some articles from the family and they were very upset with the state and the city for taking so long to get the results back.
Yeah, I would be too as a family member. Hilliard is also suspected of killing two others after he allegedly murdered Diamond. Hilliard is now 52 years old and a father of 5 children. He's been charged with 1 count of first-degree murder. He has a lengthy rap sheet. He's basically been a career criminal and continued to commit crimes during the time that he knew he was a suspect in the Diamond Turner case. He's currently awaiting his trial for Diamond's murder. So I think that in and of itself, Gibbs, if he's convicted, if they have the evidence, that kind of leads us down that path of, okay, most likely not all 51 of these individuals were killed by the same person.
Right.
I think you and I have already kind of come to that realization. And I think most people have. It's very unlikely in my thinking that they were all killed by one serial killer. My thought is it's a mixture. I think you probably have a serial killer or 2 or 3 who was operating, over this span of time. You also have some, I'll call them one-off murders,
right,
for the lack of a better term. And it's just the fact that, all of them are somewhat similar and they've not been solved. So they get grouped in together. We mentioned it, right? Chicago has a very high crime rate. The Chicago Tribune reported that there have been 40,000 homicides in the past 63 years.
That's a lot in that city.
Yeah, it's a huge number, no doubt. The city has averaged about 70 homicides a month in the past year, with the highest month total at 107.
It's a lot of murders.
And this is just homicides. When you add in all the other types of crimes, you got to wonder, Gibbs, if the authorities are just stretched thin. And I don't even think you have to wonder. I don't know how they couldn't be. I don't care how many resources you throw at it. There's only so many hours in the day.
So you have your current caseload, right, of recent homicides. You probably have the ones that you've been working on for the past year. Probably have some years before that.
And then you get into the cold cases. And
you got to act on the more recent ones because that's the best opportunity to solve them.
Yeah, to act on them quickly. Let's go back to the DNA processing. I know it took 3 years in that case. Hopefully it's not taking 3 years in every case because that's why you're not solving cases.
Exactly.
If it's really taking that long to process DNA to get results back from the lab, that's going to negatively affect your solve rate in a major way. I can't imagine that they're all taking that long, but
if they are, while you're waiting to get those results back, the person that committed that crime is still out there committing other crimes, most likely.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So as we wrap up this episode, Gibbs, you got to take a moment, right, to think about all the victims involved, the loss to their family and friends. It's a major impact on the community over the past 20 years, no matter who committed all these murders, right? If it was one person, two people, three people, or 20 different people, these women lost their lives. They shouldn't have. Their families were affected. Their friends were affected. I am shocked that a task force wasn't started or created until 2019. I am a little shocked about that.
Yeah.
Even if you were operating on the theory that this was not a serial killer, you still had a very large number of victims with similar MOs. I mean, to me, that alone would warrant some type of special attention or a task force. But then, go back and look at the homicides. You get 107 in 1 month. So how do you prioritize everything?
Right.
Can you create a task force specifically for these 51 murders that occurred over a 20-year span when you had 107, let's say, last month? I get it. These are not easy decisions, right? Made in a vacuum, you would say, okay, we should have had a task force a long time ago. But we don't operate in a vacuum. We don't operate in a bubble. So
yeah,
it's really hard to play Monday morning quarterback when we don't know everything that's going on. But we do know some things when we look at some of these numbers. They are disturbing, the number of homicides, and then you add in other types of crimes on top of it. So it can't be easy at all.
I did find that website, the unforgotten51.com, was a nice site because it showcased the lives of the victims with their family pictures and, some stories about the victims. It was pretty touching.
Yeah, no, I took a look at it as well. It's really great. I mean, it's the type of information that you and I would normally try to give in an episode. The problem is you just, like I said earlier, you can't do that with 51 victims,
right?
When you're talking about that high of a number of victims, and it wouldn't be fair to talk about one or two or five and not talk about the rest. So
exactly.
It's tough that we couldn't do that. So I think it's good you bring it up. I think people should go out there and check it out. But Gibbs, that's it for our episode on the Chicago Strangler. We got some voicemails. You want to check those out?
Let's hear them.
Hey, Mike and Gibby, it's Darby. I'm living in Florida, but I'm actually from Ohio, from Troy. I've actually heard you guys mention Troy. I forget the name, but there was one where a girl went missing from Troy, and I was like, oh my God. But yeah, this is my second time calling. I've been a Patreon for like less than a year. But I've been listening to you guys for about the same, maybe about a year now. I even got my fiance on it a little bit. So yeah, I appreciate everything y'all do. Really became a lot more knowledgeable of the criminology aspect of things, which I should be. I'm actually wanting to go into forensics, so this is right up my alley. So yeah, just thanks for everything y'all do, and I hope my voicemail gets on. Okay, y'all have a good night, and you keep your own time ticking.
Yeah, I remember the Troy case.
Was that Buckskin Girl, or was that a different one?
It was a different one.
Oh, okay.
It was 3 or 4 cases that we did in the surrounding area, and that was one of them.
And one of the victims was from Troy.
Troy, yeah.
Well, your voicemail's on.
You made it.
You made it on.
Hey guys, this is Francesco in Portland, Oregon. I got a case suggestion for you. It's from the early 90s. The disappearance of Fawn Knutson. She was a young trophy wife, owed money all over town in L.A., and including the known pornographers. And anyway, some people think she kidnapped herself, but it's a very complicated case. A lot of ins, a lot of outs, a lot of what have yous. One of the dudes who was close to the case was sort of playing one side against the other and in bed with everybody, and it's a very interesting case. They should make a movie about it, but I'd love to hear y'all's take on it. Thank you.
I tried to kidnap myself once. It never worked out.
So first, that doesn't surprise me that you would try that. That name sounds very familiar. It also sounds eerily similar to the plot of The Big Lebowski. A little bit.
A little bit.
So, I don't know. Maybe they based it off of that. I'll have to research it, but the name sounds kind of familiar.
Hey, guys. This is Matthew from College Station, Texas, home of Texas A&M University. Anyway, I was just listening to the latest podcast, and Gibby just randomly mentioned raise up lights, and I've been trying to work on my Australian accent, so that was one thing that I've remembered throughout all the.
Just something really weird. It's like blinked and went away.
Yeah, we lost him.
We lost him.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was it.
Oh, that was it.
But I wanted to put him on.
Okay.
Because I'm sure he had more to say. You know, go Aggies. He would have said that probably at the end.
You think?
Probably.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was just like, I don't know if it was our equipment, his phone, or whatever, but it just cut out. But he's on.
You made it again.
Made it on.
Hi, guys. My name is Lindsay. I'm a huge fan. I'm from Michigan, and I have an unsolved case you might be interested in. It's about the disappearance of a man named Richie Hitchcock, and it happened back in the 90s. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. It's right here in my hometown. So if you guys want to take a look into it, let me know. Thanks. Bye.
All right. Thank you very much. We'll definitely take a look into it. It's not a name I'm familiar with, but
me neither.
We'll check it out.
Thank you.
All right, buddy. That is it for another episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved. So for Mike
and Gibby,
stay safe and keep your own time ticking.